Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everyone.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer insights and ideas for how emerging small and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can establish and grow their business.
Bruce and I have been working in CPG commercial operations for over 30 years, working on brands of all sizes. By commercial operations, we mean all aspects involved in establishing and growing brands across channels and platforms. On our show, we bring on guests that are brand founders, leaders, investors, as well as all kinds of suppliers to these emerging brands that are subject matter experts to share their unique insights with the audience.
To keep up with the show, please follow the Road to Retail podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Leave us a review and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. You can also check out our website at www.road2retail.com and follow The Road to Retail on LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. Since 1994, the Emerson Group has been the trusted partner to brands, retailers, suppliers, and the CPG industry. Their people are CPG professionals and omnichannel commerce experts. They have built a fully integrated infrastructure with a suite of services and capabilities focused on launching and accelerating the growth of health, wellness, and beauty brands. Powered by their proprietary Omega AI data technology platform, which utilizes a brand's insights and data analytics to create a brand's go-to-market strategy, optimize their omnichannel distribution, build marketing plans, and optimize supply chain. The Emerson Group infrastructure and capabilities serve brands in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. To learn more, visit their website at www.emersongroup.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of The Road to Retail. And there he is, ladies and gentlemen, in the flesh, Tracy Priest. Tracy, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, Bruce, doing very, very well, and great to see you, and very excited about our episode today. So tell us a little bit about who we have, and let's jump in.
Today we're being joined by Mike Wysong, who is CEO of Pharmacies and a very well-known player in the healthcare industry. So, Mike, thank you for your time this morning and for joining us.
That's my pleasure. I appreciate the honor of being here with both of you this morning.
Well, that's great. So you have a really unique background, Mike. Before we get into the specifics, why don't you tell the folks a little bit, kind of your background, how you ultimately ended up in the role you're in?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting story, Bruce. I always kind of start back at the beginning. As a kid, when I grew up in Wisconsin, I had a twin brother, and his name is Mark. And for folks that may be at the annual meeting, I think he might be in attendance, and so you'll have to say hi when you see him. But there was always this problem of being the smaller twin, Bruce, and so I ended up losing at a lot of things in all our competitions. And so I ended up gravitating to art when I was a kid and realized that I could paint and draw. And so I found that to be an outlet and really kind of captured that as my identity. And athletics were highly focused in our house, as you might imagine. And so my brother and I were wrestling partners. And so we grew up competing. And when it came time to go to college, we both elected to kind of take the path less traveled. And so we decided we'd go to school together at the Virginia Military Institute. As it turns out, my parents thought that I would have a hard time feeding myself as an artist, and I needed to learn to be compliant and conscientious and learn to show up on time. And as it turns out, they weren't wrong. And so I learned a lot of good things about working in groups of people and having a plan and showing up and all the things that I didn't realize would be underpinnings of the jobs that I ultimately ended up taking on over the course of the last 35 years. When it was time to graduate from VMI, I realized that I really enjoyed working in groups of people more than I liked the schoolwork. I was a biology major, and the colonel told me I was never going to go to med school because, as it turns out, you have to pass organic chemistry to go to med school. And so I graduated, right? And I laugh because it's really one of the early lessons that I learned. He goes, Mike, look, I'm going to help you get through here, but promise me when you graduate, you never go into healthcare. And of course, he was teasing a little bit, but I graduated and was fortunate enough to get a job at a company called Baxter Healthcare, which at the time was really a preeminent medical surgical distributor. My first job was in New Orleans. So I picked up and moved to New Orleans and was a field rep. And I had no idea what I was selling. I called on all my customers. And when I was done, I didn't know what to do. So I called on them again and I called on them again. And I think at some point in time, they realized I wasn't going to stop calling on them. And so they started to buy things. And my first year in my job was quite successful and I ended up getting promoted. And that seemed to be a pattern over the course of the first couple of years of my career. And I found myself in a number of leadership positions at Allegiance Healthcare, and then ultimately Cardinal Healthcare. Cardinal Healthcare came in and acquired Allegiance Healthcare, and this whole thing, pharmacy, was my first introduction through the acquisition of Cardinal into Allegiance. I knew nothing about pharmacy. Again, kind of put in charge of working with large customers on the chain and independent side. Spent about 17 years at Cardinal Health. And then was brought over to run basically the Midwest for the chain and independent side for a company called AmerisourceBergen. Dave Yost, the CEO at the time, was an Air Force Academy grad, and they needed somebody to kind of fill that role. Elisa and I were at the end of having our 7th child. So I go, all right, I have to make sure I can feed my family. So I took the role, relocated to the Midwest, and worked for Amerisource for a couple of years before moving back to Maryland. The job at Care Pharmacies became available. A good friend of mine, Jerry Crocker, was moving to another tour of duty. And he called me up and he said, hey, Mike, I know you're looking to come back to the East Coast. And there's an opportunity here for a company that I think you'd be a great fit for. So I took the job, and that's how I ended up at Care Pharmacies back in 2010. I was really a kid, 39 years old, with, almost 20 years of working in key customer development and medical, surgical, and pharmaceutical sales.
Well, that's quite a story. So, Mike, we're gonna backtrack a little bit to VMI. Not really known for free time and free thinkers. And you might have volunteered. Is that one painting of you dunking on your brother since he can't defend himself here in your artistic mode?
It might be. I go back, Bruce. There's so many great lessons from my time at VMI. Really centered around, being responsible, this kind of sense of faith, and then perseverance. I always laugh. I ended up in wrestling totally by accident. I really wanted to be a basketball player. And I couldn't make the basketball team because it turns out you have to pass, dribble, and shoot. So I ended up on the wrestling team with all the other kids that weren't athletic, never realizing that I'd be a Division I college wrestler. And one of my favorite stories, back in the late 80s, there was an all-star wrestling team that went over to wrestle in the Soviet Union, and I was on the team. And I got over there and got beat up pretty bad because, as it turns out, the Soviets are pretty good on wrestling mats. And we were shaking hands at the end of the match, and the head coach leaned over and whispered one word in my ear in a heavy Russian accent, and he said, basketball. So I'm like, where were you all those years ago when I needed you? But, sometimes plans, God has a different idea for where we go. But, VMI was really a great incubator for me, about some of the fundamental principles that have made me successful in some of the roles that I've been fortunate enough to have. And the very foundational. I always laugh, as an Air Force guy, our motto is aim high. And I learned a long time ago that really, if you aim low enough and you establish the reality or the truth, it makes getting to the next point much easier because you're honest about where you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Well, that's great. So
Yeah.
Mike, you know what I just got to hear. I want to hear about how VMI, a certain individual, cut you a break when I believe you told me maybe he didn't need to.
Well, there's a bunch of them, but my favorite one is as a college wrestler, you have to make weight, and at military duty, the only time you could ever leave post was you would run through the campus of Washington and Lee, which is, you probably are familiar with, Washington and Lee and VMI share a parking lot. So as a cadet, you have no hair. You're in your gym uniform, which looks like it was made in the 20s. You look terrible. It's not fashionable at all. So as you're running through the campus of Washington and Lee, all the students are sitting out on the front lawn and they make fun of you as you run by. And of course, they're all there with their girlfriends, and it's 78 degrees. It's beautiful. They're having their cocktails. So my senior year, I decided, I was a company commander. I was one of the top ranked kids in the school. I go, all right, before this thing is over, I'm going to sit on that lawn one time and just know what it was like to be on the other end of this thing. And so I got all my civilian clothes out of the trunk room, which you're not supposed to do. I put them on. I slid over to Washington and Lee during military duty. I set a blanket up on the lawn. And I sat there and I made fun of everybody that ran by me. And of course, they're all looking at me going, what are you doing? You're going to get caught. And I almost made it. I almost made it to the end of military duty. And as I was literally collecting my stuff to get up to sneak back on post, this car comes tooling up the Washington and Lee Drive. And I realized it was Colonel Dabney. And Colonel Dabney looked at me and I looked at him, and I realized there was no escaping this at all.
And he's like the boss.
Oh, he's the godfather. He's, the right hand of the superintendent. But Colonel Dabney is a legend. I mean, he's and a legend might be, selling it short. Colonel Dabney is got this presence about him. I mean, he's just, you see him and he's leadership personified, stone cold leadership, right? So of course I make my way back into barracks. I get back into barracks. I get to my room. There's a special on my door. Basically, don't do anything else except get dressed in your military, best uniform, and meet, go right down to the commandant's office. So I get down to the commandant's office. Who's there? Colonel Dabney. And Colonel Dabney goes, "What are you doing?" This is 3 weeks before graduation. And he's like, "Mike, you could not graduate. You could get a 10, 6, and 30 for this thing. You could basically not graduate for the infraction of being uptown and properly dressed." And in his own way, he gave me a hug and he goes, "Hey, look, you've really done a nice job of overcoming some of your shortcomings as a human being. We're gonna be objective here and pay it forward." And in a moment of uncertainty and anxiety for me, he was really good to me and always had a way of encouraging me to just be a better version of myself. And so Colonel Dabney is certainly one of those people that I look retrospectively on of having been a great representation of what humane leadership is. Tough as nails, but man, could he connect with you in a really inspiring way.
Well, that's a great story. And living where I live, not too far from VMI, the brotherhood of the VMI people is borderline insane in their commitment to each other. So, which I admire. I think loyalty to people you share something in common with is important, whether it's business, family, etc. All right, Tracy, before I start weeping, you should probably move us along.
I don't want to see you weep, Bruce. I just don't want to see it. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about Care Pharmacies and your role, and a little bit about what they do and their uniqueness in the healthcare industry.
Care is a cool thing. When I first came to Care in 2010, I'll tell you, I didn't really fully appreciate how special it was. I was just excited to really take what would really be my first true leadership position, where you're totally in charge of, setting a plan and executing on that. When I got to Care, we had about 40 pharmacies. Most of them were in the Maryland, Virginia corridor. And we had this thing called ADAP, which was the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. And as it turns out, Care was the premier HIV provider in the District of Columbia. The other thing that was kind of cool about Care is it was a pharmacy franchise. And so it was kind of a hybrid sitting in between what you would consider, a regional chain and an independent buying group, or, kind of one of these, more than loosely affiliated collection of independent community pharmacies. And so I looked at that and went, man, that's quite a uniqueness when you look at it. It has the capacity to be a high touch care provider in areas of underserved communities, in areas of high need. but it had continuity in places that I thought if we really, refine that would be advantages all the way around. And so that was really kind of the first thought of what we would do at Care. And then, I'm super big on relationships. You mentioned some of the things that you learn at VMI. There's this thing, as a brother rat, it's a mutual reciprocity. It's an altruistic reciprocity where the relationships you have and that you forge really define you and where you can go and what the potential of that is. And so I went to my first NACDS meeting back in like 2012. I didn't know anybody. I walked by the pool 15 times before my good friends Brian Bradley and Randy Sloan over at Lorna Mead pulled me aside and said, "Man, what are you doing?" I said, "Guys, I have no idea what I'm doing." They go, "Well, you got to have the plan. You got to set up your meetings, and here's who you should talk to." And so they were really instrumental in helping, get me dialed in there. And when I left them, they go, and who knows, maybe one day you'll be the chairman of the board. I didn't realize that it would take, about 12 years for that to happen, but, they saw something there. But so the idea was to kind of take care, build out the relationships on the chain side, which we were able to do. The HIV business turned out to be really the foundational, what I would say, this foundational disease state of specialty pharmacy, right? So Hep C, RA, MS, all of these high touch, super expensive disease states are kind of the underpinning and focus of Care Pharmacies, but with that community-based feel to it. So, and over the course of my 15 years now at Care Pharmacies, it's gone through quite an accelerated growth pattern, and has gone through quite a maturation. And we actually celebrated 65 years as an organization last year. So it's been quite a run.
That's awesome. So, Mike, one of the things Tracy and I try to avoid is the use of acronyms on the show. And I did note you used one, RAT. What might that be in the VMI vernacular?
Yeah, so you would assume that being called a rat would be a bad thing, right? A brother rat would be not a good thing, but it's actually a term of endearment. It's a very general military philosophy that your classmates or your colleagues, you lift them up and you encourage and inspire them. Nobody gets left behind. So a brother rat is actually a term of endearment, as just maybe an unrefined way of saying a highly reputable and honorable colleague.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So Mike, in your position, you've had the opportunity to meet a lot of different people in all corners of the healthcare industry. So you've already kind of driven home how relationships are important to you, but what have you seen and learned along the way from these various folks you've had the, pleasure of, running into and influencing, and those that, like Randy Sloan, pulled you aside and said, "Dude, what are you doing?"
The Randy Sloan and Brian Bradley example is just a microcosm of it. I could tell you, 2020, Care Pharmacies had the distinction of being named the regional drug chain of the year during COVID. And we went up to New York City, Drugstore News, Retail Media IQ put on an event to recognize that. And I gave a speech about Carnegie Hall. And that when you look at Carnegie Hall, it's the greatest amphitheater on the planet, or at least recognized for that. But if you look at it from a construction perspective, it shouldn't work at all. And I drew a moral equivalence between how care functions, and sometimes the things that don't look like they should function are actually the things that make it function. At the end of that speech, I was this gentleman named Scott Emerson, who I kindly refer to as Randall. That's his middle name, and I love to refer to him as Randall. But I gave Scott a hug at the end of the event, and that was when I started really kind of a foray into the CPG side of things, and got to meet him, some of his coworkers and colleagues. That ended up resulting in a chairmanship at NACDS for me, which gave me quite a lot of flexibility to move around the industry. I wanted to be very forward thinking in terms of my engagement there, and I learned a lot on that. I ended up in places that I didn't think I would end up in, developing some of the relationships that were the underpinning of this developing thought in my brain about how interconnected our industry is. It doesn't matter if it's on the CPG side or the manufacturer side or the retailer side. There's this very big interdependence that exists There's a good faith and a collective spirit that resides across that. And if you're proactive in your connection of that, man, it'll give you back more than you give it. It's been quite an experience. It's been very uplifting too to have had the opportunity to go out and not just represent care, but also the industry as I've been moving around in those places. So the relationship's important, but so is being proactive in your engagement there.
So one of the things, Mike, you keep driving home, whether directly or indirectly, your views on leadership and taking care of those. The brother rat example for one. Talk about how you view mentoring the next generation of people that you see coming along.
Well, like I said, it's always a paradox of theory. So you run across people while you're out and about, or they run into you, and it's an opportunity to connect. I think about a Brooks Powell. Brooks has been on this program, and if you know Brooks, he's a lovely human being, a competitive swimmer, has an innate faith. He and his wife are just they're lovely people. You know, he and I connected early on in his journey. And he and I have kind of a co-mentoring relationship. And I always laugh because people, Brooks will go, Wysong has been good about helping me. But the truth is, it's a very reciprocal relationship. Brooks has been very good to me about helping me navigate some of the nuances of digital. As a middle-aged person, there's this new refinement of all the technologies come in. And so, you look at somebody like Brooks and the next generation of CPG or care providers. I think we have an obligation, like my colonels did to me to help get me to be the very best version that I could be of myself. I think I have the same moral obligation to do that. But if you look across our industry, there's so many of them. I think about Elos friends, and I'm sure we'll talk about them at some point here. That's the quintessential example of the next group of people that are coming in that will influence how we serve our customers and how we identify new areas of opportunity to serve customers. But there's so many of them out there. There's so many great new faces in our industry. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, Brooks has made it quite clear to me that he thinks this digital thing's going to actually stick around for a while. So we appreciate Brooks coming on the show as well. Tracy?
Yes, and by the way, Brooks has been very successful building his business through digital. So congratulations to Brooks. So, Mike, in your role at Care Pharmacies, you've seen probably a lot of innovation, both from large CPG healthcare companies, but also from entrepreneurs. So maybe tell our audience a little bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace today, and then maybe the difference between innovation coming from a large CPG company versus an entrepreneur like Brooks. So talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the market.
I think we're at a very interesting time, right? And we talked about just a little bit of it here about 2 minutes ago, right? So from my perspective, you have kind of an emergence in a transition of meeting customers where they want to be. If I look at Care Pharmacies, I always laugh because we have these strategic meetings and I make references that half the team doesn't get. So you have kind of this merging of the old and the new, right? The refinement of the technology. So I think that the two things can be true here. Like for the existing brands, it's how do they continue to stay relevant in the refinement of the digital footprint, right? And the new providers are how do you tell your story and how do you get it out there and how do you build a network of people that can tell that story that can help get those products to market. So I always say two things can be true at the same time. Those things are at a meeting point now. You have to be able to do both of those things. You have to be able to look back, make sure that you have the brick and mortars, make sure that you have the foundation for that. And then you have to make sure that you have the renewal and refinement of that moving forward through the technology pieces of that. And I don't think you can have one without the other.
Very insightful. Totally
Yeah.
agree.
So, Mike, as you've pointed out, care kind of has some tentacles in different corners of the healthcare field. And it's such a large, complex, vital industry to the country. What changes in business models are you seeing that you think may be worth pursuing? Or if that's too aggressive a word, at least keeping your eye on saying, not sure, but that could be interesting.
Yeah. So again, I think if you go back in, I think if you establish where we are, right? So the system as it exists today is very segmented, right? When you look at providers, you look at payers, you look at wholesalers, you look at consumer product groups, manufacturers. The system has been put together over a very long period of time and is very segregated and segmented. I think historically, a lot of times for providers like care, we're treating the symptoms of things. We're very reactive in that. And I think we're getting to a point where we're going to have to be much more proactive in closing some of the gaps of care, much more prescriptive in how we do that. So I think it's going to be more proactive, more prescriptive, more preventative in focus as these models become less segregated because of all the digital refinement and all the health tech that's coming to the market. At the end of that, you can't lose sight of the fact that the interactions and the relationships are still foundational to that, right? So the ability for people to work together in good faith, the ability for people to connect in places that are important. So it's bringing those two things together. I always say it's kind of like connecting your voice and your touch. And to do that, one can't be at the expense of the other. And I think that really is the nuance of where we are today, because I think the gaps are going to close. You look at the digital refinements that are coming, they're going to have a pretty big impact on the way people are consuming a lot of these products. As the generational changes continue to shift over, and I won't give you the stats because I know you've had, a bunch of people on here give those to you, but we're going to continue to see a refinement of that. And I think while they're moving forward, we can't forget the fact that this is, people still have to plug these things in. People are still connecting on some foundational and fundamental level, right? So I think it's kind of a harmonious balance between those two things and recognizing where you are there.
Yeah, there's no question that there's commercially there's a lot of money to be made, and then as a society there's lots of problems to be solved if you can eliminate some of that friction and, as you say, the segmentation. The fact that the left hand needs like 14 documents in order to talk to the right hand is kind of crazy. And there never seems to be time to fix any of this stuff, but everyone has plenty of time to complain about it. So hopefully there's folks out there working to solve the problems rather than just continuously point out that we have problems.
Yeah, and there are. I always laugh. I always say pharmacy is like single-handedly keeping the fax machine alive. But I love one of my guilty so one of my guilty pleasures, and my wife teases me about it all the time. I love cars, right? And so I like the old school big muscle horsepower cars. The new technology of battery powered cars. The battery powered cars are fast. They're faster than the gas powered cars today. So the challenge is the current infrastructure for a lot of gas powered cars is keeping a lot of the new technology from coming in. And I think healthcare has some of the same intrinsic challenges to it that the car industry has. That'll work itself out over time as some of the renewals take place and shape it. But I think we're in one of those moments where there still is a healthy exchange between those personal interactions that have to take place and then the refinement of what the technology is going to do for us moving forward.
Right.
Great. So, Mike, talk to us a little bit about the role that small and emerging brands play at care pharmacies. And then also, what have you seen? What actions are these small emerging brands taking that is creating a winning formula for them?
Yeah, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories that I think kind of personifies that, Tracy. So the Wysongs are on vacation back in 2022. And as you can imagine, we have 7 children, and so all the kids' friends come on vacation with us, and it's quite a block party. So as the house is emptying out, one of the kids comes over to me and he goes, "Hey, Mike, I know you're in pharmacy. Can I chat with you?" I go, "Sure." He goes, "Well, I have an idea I want to run by you." I go, "Okay, well, what is it?" He goes, "Well, I'm a soccer player." And I go, "Pete, everybody in the house is a soccer player. I have 5 Division I college soccer players." He goes, "Well, I want to create an insole that heats and cools, and can I run my pitch by you?" I go, "Sure." So at the end of that, I'm like, "Look, I have to tell you, your idea is a really great idea, but your pitch is terrible. So let's kind of walk through where there may be areas to refine your pitch, and let's kind of dig low enough here for the truth in terms of, are you asking the right question? Is this a product that really has a benefit to people that might want to procure that? And then how do we put that together so that it becomes something, right? I always say art is manifested potential. How do you take it from nothing and bring it into being so that somebody uses it or sees it and is benefited or moved by it, right? And so the kid comes over to my house every weekend for a year and a half. He gets the patent, he refines the product. It's a lovely product. It's available on Amazon now. I use that as an example because these little areas of innovation, they're out there. You just have to look for them. They have to be cultivated and they have to be manifested. And if you're proactive in that and you're reaching back to the next group of folks that may not know what that pathway is, or they may not know what plan is an effective plan, then that's really a role that you can play in terms of helping some of these emerging brands come to market. And then when they do, everybody benefits from that. The people that are now going to stand on the sidelines whose feet aren't cold, or the skiers or the military folks, that's a good innovative problem to be solved, right? And the kid was smart enough at 21 to ask the question and then have enough perseverance and resolve and enough awareness to then put the right people around him to bring this thing from nothing to something. And if you look around our industry, there's a lot of people like that. You look at Isaac Shapiro over at Clean Logic. He's one of those people. You look at Glenn Nermoil over at New Fabrics. I mean, these are all young innovators that have a resolve and a desire to see these things come out and benefit a large group of people. So I'm inspired by that. I love the concept and the idea of that. And it's all around you. You just have to look for it.
Mm. Well, what's interesting about that, Mike, is, Tracy and I come across lots of emerging brands, and some of them win, some lose, and some have been the same size forever. But the description you made about this young man is he had the humility to, one, admit he didn't know everything, and then the courage to actually take the input he was receiving and keep refining. I mean, if you stop learning, you're dead. And
Yes.
there's nothing when I was leading commercial teams I liked more than competing against someone who already thought they knew everything. Because a stationary target, I've never shot anything, but I imagine that's easier to hit than one that's always moving around.
Well, that's why I like, you go back to Emerson. That's why I like them. They're very good about moving from point A to point B. That's a very military concept of moving from point A to point B, assuming point B is some more favorable place. In the military, it's just moving the tank across the terrain. In the consumer product space, it might take an emerging brand and moving it from where it is to some more favorable place, moving it through a distribution channel. So that's an organization, I think, that values itself on being a Sherpa in terms of creating safe passage for these brands from where they are to where they could or should or are obligated to be. And I think, you don't have kids unless that's a concept that you're enamored by. So you just hope at some point in time you're not referring to it as potential anymore, right?
Yep.
So I think those are kind of the underpinnings that are, from my perspective, intriguing to me. And if you take a step back from that and you're not blinded by it, but you look at material pathway forward for a lot of these emerging brands, then the pathway becomes much more possible and much more probable, right?
Yeah. So I think you just hit on the perfect segue to the next question or topic we're going to cover here. So in your experience, what counsel would you offer to an emerging brand that maybe is a little bit bigger than Elos, that's starting to get some traction? They're, about managing their distribution and growth across platforms, whether it's, hey, I'm selling X dollars a month on Amazon or through my own website, and they come to you, it's like, now I'm ready to go to X retailer, or I'm gonna come up with 65 more SKUs. What do you tell these people to protect them from themselves in some instances?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I tell you, I'm actually guilty of it myself, and I guess because I'm guilty of it myself, I'm aware that I do that. I think what happens is that when you're a successful brand or you're successful in the application of an idea that you have, right? I think what intuitively happens is you actually become blinded by the very thing that drives you. You know what works. So sometimes then maybe you're a little quick about not taking a step back to really look at the entire terrain that you're trying to navigate through, right? And is the story right? I'm a huge fan of a story, right? And what's at the center of a story? The why is at the center of a story. The philosophy is at the center of a story. There are so many products that exist that don't actually answer the right question. Right? So I see that in technology all the time. You get these data sets, and I'm like, I didn't even, that's not even a question I'm asking. So can you look low enough to really figure out the why of that? What is the story associated with that? And then can you take a step back to not be blinded by the very drive to move this thing through? I think Brooks has been very good about that in terms of telling the story digitally and getting that story out there. Those are all pathways and avenues to tell a compelling story about why the brand is important. I think a lot of times, you talked about the speeches. My speeches tend to be very story driven. I think that's way more compelling than standing up or talking about, hey, here's the product and the features and the benefits of the product, because there's so many products and there's so many features and the benefits to that. So my recommendation from my perspective on an emerging brand or product is establish the reality. Where are you? Step back. What's possible? What's probable? Are we asking the right questions? Are we making the right refinements to get the story out there? And is it a compelling story that people want to hear? And is it a compelling story that people want to be a part of? And if it is, then put yourself in places with partners that personify the things that are important to you. At Care Pharmacies, the partnerships that we have, they personify who we are as a provider. I'm very careful about who we partner with because I want to make sure that our partners, the things that matter to us, matter to them. And then when you do that, it has this exponential impact. And I always tell when people come to me, they're like, hey, how did Care Pharmacies grow from $100 million to $2 billion? And the answer is we looked low enough for the truth. We established a reality. We partnered in places that were beneficial, and we worked in good faith and looked for new ways to serve our customers. And that's the advice that I would give for existing and new brands.
So, Mike, one more thing on this. So you carried the bag and now you see tons of brands in your current role and throughout your career as NACDS chair, CPG, etc. What counsel would you offer to a emerging or small brand in terms of handling the sales function? Tracy and I have had a lot of people come on. They're like, we're going to do everything ourselves. And then, usually there's a smoking hole somewhere in the desert, and they're like, yeah, I probably should have paid someone who knew what they're doing. So what's your view on go it alone or hire a sales agent or broker that can really help you? And then one more layer here, please. Sometimes it only makes sense to go to one or two places. So do you find someone who just can really kill it at a Meijer or a Care Pharmacy, or do you look for a generalist?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there's a couple of questions in that. I will answer your first question like this. When I was 26 or 27, I got into racing cars. Okay. And I showed up at the racetrack with my brand new race car. Okay. And my first two races were outstanding, but I had hired a CSR to stand by as my pit crew, and I paid him a bunch of money to do nothing. Okay. On my third race, I totaled my race car and they fixed it like that. Okay. Having somebody alongside you to help you and counsel you is worth it, especially as you're starting out, because they've already been up and down the mountain 20 times. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't individual inventors or entrepreneurs that may be well credentialed, they may be well established, they may already have some of those partnerships. Man, it is hard to navigate through a complex scenario, bringing a product from nothing to something without some level of refinement or involvement from other groups, whether that's a group like an Emerson or establishing wholesale distribution partners or having an intermediary to help you inventory the product. So I would say be open to any of those possibilities, but the likelihood that you do that alone is not high from my perspective. I don't think I've done anything on my own by myself where it didn't require being open to the partnerships or input from other people, especially in this space.
Tracy and I have spoken to a lot of retailers, and they have said, do you guys have any idea how many brands we were willing to take a shot with that never made it to the shelf because they couldn't navigate the portal and get set up? Yep. So,
I think that's true. I think that's true. There are so many brands that are out there that are viable brands. but they just can't navigate through the complexities and the uncertainty of a very dynamic, setup. And it is.
So before I hand this to Tracy, acronym. I didn't know a customer service rep could fix a race car. What did CSR mean in your instance?
So in the racing industry, they have CSRs that you hire that they're basically full stop race shops. If you don't have your own pit crew, you can hire a pit crew and they basically tractor trailer your cars to the track. So if you run into something, they fix your car for you. Now, if you can't afford that and you're on your own and you run into something, then you spend all day fixing your own stuff. So at the end of that, it's what are you after, right? Where it's a price versus promise equation. And that's a really nice way to describe it. What's the price and what's the promise? A lot of times the upfront investments to partner with people that have expertise in areas that you don't has a great return. You just might not see that out of the gate. And that's why I say those relationships that you have and that you foster pay off at some point in time in an altruistic, reciprocal manner. Put people around you that have expertise in areas that you don't and make sure that you trust them.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. So kind of a good segue to that, Mike, is so an entrepreneur comes up to you on the street and says, I want to start a CPG brand. What's the first piece of advice that you give that person?
Well, the first thing I say is that's a terrible idea. I'm all in.
I love it.
Yes. Look, again, I go back to, all right, an idea is like the first form of philosophy. All right, tell me what the idea is. What problem are we solving here? What is the plan? Like I said, I go back and go, okay, let's go back in and really establish the reality here. The guys at Elos is a perfect example of that. Okay, that's not a terrible idea, but your pitch here and how you're going to move forward is terrible. This thing ain't going anywhere if you don't do 1, 2, and 3. And then when you do that, okay, what's around you? Who's around you that has expertise in the areas that we're going to need here as you continue to make these microprocesses and these microprocess steps, along the way. So I would be very encouraging, but very pragmatic about making sure that we were honest about how viable the idea is and what would be the 2 or 3 things that we would need to do to take it to the next step so that we could then figure out the 2 or 3 things that we need to do from that step. And if you break it down like that, then I think it becomes much more manageable. And you could take a product like these heating and cooling insoles and move them from concept to in store in 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's great. One day when the Road to Retail has its own apparel shop, one of our T-shirts for the entrepreneurs, getting back to your racing, is all gas, no brakes. I mean, again, it comes back. Your Elos guy was willing to listen, so he at least downshifted, if not tapped the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, and then along the way, we were smart to stop and go, okay, are we missing something here? Where are we deficient? What are we not seeing, right? What you don't know is what gets you. Okay, are there people around us that may see something that we don't? And I think, again, those network of people that are working collaboratively to move this thing along or move these products along, I think the success rate goes up exponentially because, you're not making silly mistakes that cost you time and money when time and money are, valuable assets.
Yeah, absolutely. They are. So, Mike, you've alluded to a couple of people already, but who's had the biggest influence on your career and did things for you that have really stayed with you? Either like Colonel Dabney, who chose not to throw you out of school with 3 weeks to go, or some of the professional mentors. You don't have to name any names, but what actions did these people take where you're like, you know what? I was young and didn't realize it, but that was pretty great.
Well, I will say this. If I go back, there's been a bunch of them. I'll just kind of walk you through it quickly. I think as a kid, I was open to the notion that my parents were, wanted the best for me and maybe were, not trying to hold me back or hold me down. And so, my dad was certainly one of those people. My mother knew that my creativity would be an asset, but that I would likely use it in the wrong way. And so I was smart enough to listen to the two of them. And so they were certainly, my 2 biggest fans and probably the 2 people that have been most influential on it. Mrs. Wysong has certainly been the ongoing, steady, rudder of our house with 7 kids and, a bunch of jobs and working in trade associations and all of that. At VMI, Colonel Dabney certainly was, just in terms of he stood tall and his shoulders back, and when he talked, you listened to what he had to say. Colonel Bauer was always that way. He's just always kind of like, hey, don't do it, because he knew if he told me not to do it, he knew I was going to find a way to do it. Colonel Lau in the psychology department, I would have never met my wife if it hadn't been for Colonel Lau. Again, a very inspiring, uplifting person that made me dig low enough to figure out, where my gifts were as a leader. So that whole crowd of people, and then professionally, man, I've been super blessed with a lot of the bosses that I've had along the way. I think about a guy like John Kilgore at Cardinal Health. He would pull you in and he could give you the truth without burning you to the ground, but to inspire you to be a better version. Tom Burke's another one of them. I look at my time at Care Pharmacies, Jerry Crocker having enough confidence to bring me in and give me an opportunity to be a CEO at a young age. All the people that I've worked with, Scott Emerson's that way. David Pinto's that way. David Pinto in my time out in the industry. A Bob Quate, talked to Bob Quate a lot. I've tripped across Bob Quate. Bob is, credited with doing the first consumer value store and putting out front, up products out front in the first CVS. And so, man, I've just been lucky to have come across so many people that were influential in all those regards.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Love
Been
it.
Great.
So as Bruce says, rounding third and heading home from our discussion today, tell us a little bit about your hobbies and what you do in your free time.
Well, as you can imagine, I don't have much free time. We have kids that play college soccer across the country. So what discretionary time we have, we normally like to watch them compete, which is a lot of fun. I mentioned my passion for cars and depreciating assets. My wife says I have a problem with low resolution pleasure for cars and whiskey. I like to make my own bourbon. So I love that. I love wine. I always say wine is like Formula One. Bourbon is like NASCAR. They're both cars, but I like both of them. So I would say those would be my primary hobbies. And then obviously my great passion is oil painting.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So I love oil painting. I love just the creativity of that. And Vincent van Gogh is my hero. I named my oldest son Vincent as an homage to my hero, Vincent van Gogh.
That's
Great.
awesome. So my father was an artist and head of creative of an agency in New York, and he had the misfortune of having both of his sons be extraordinarily colorblind, which disappointed him to no end. So Mike, last topic, pretty important. Who is your favorite sports team, band, or brand, and why do you like them?
That's a good question. I would say my favorite team, I guess, assuming we're talking football, would definitely be the Green Bay Packers. Yeah. So for all the people that are watching this from Minnesota and Chicago, I still love you, but yes, it would be the Green Bay Packers. And the funny thing has happened. I don't know why, but my musical tastes have changed as I've gotten a little bit older and I've regressed back to classic rock. So I love Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin.
You're speaking Bruce's line.
Okay, Tracy, we're keeping Mike's interview because he's given the right answers.
I know you're speaking Bruce's love language when you mentioned.
So Mike, I bought the last time the Packers offered shares, I bought one share for one of my boys for Christmas. And my wife, making helpful wife-like comments, goes, "They're not even real." And I said, "Yeah, but it's cool." And then I launched a proxy back in the day to try to get the Packers to trade Aaron Rodgers to the Panthers, but they did not do that. So Mike, thank you so much for your time today. How can people get in touch with you or learn more about Care Pharmacies?
Yep, you can reach directly out to us. I know my information's on our website. I'm on LinkedIn and pretty active there. If you want to ping me, I'm usually pretty good in my follow-up and response. Those would be the best ways to get hold of us.
All right. Well, thanks again for your time. Tracy, the big finish. I hope your arm is loose.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, this has been awesome. Great insight for small emerging brands. Our audience, they're going to love listening to this episode. We really appreciate your time today. And audience, thanks for joining us. Please continue to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube. We post every Tuesday, as well as check out our website, www.road2retail.com. And again, we post every Tuesday. Look for this episode soon. And Mike, just an excellent episode. And we so appreciate your time today. And as always, Bruce, good to see you.
Thank you, Tracy. Mike, thanks so much, and good luck out there, folks.
Thank you, gentlemen.